Hi guys, as promised, this is 2 Samuel, and it has to do with David and how we all can learn an important lesson from what happened to David when he did not draw boundaries when it came to his adult son. As you can see, the results were tragic. So hopefully you can get a lot out of this message. You can find this podcast not only on Spotify, but Amazon, iHeartRadio, just to name a few. Check it out.
Okay, so welcome to 2 Samuel, and you can find this in 5 through 8. David was anointed king over Israel. He was 30 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned for 40 years. At Hebron, he resigned over Judah for 7 years and 6 months, and in Jerusalem, he reigned for 33 years over all of Israel. After David's victory, he said, "Is there any that is left of the house of Saul, that I may show him kindness for Jonathan's sake?" A servant of the house of Saul, whose name was Ziba, was called unto David. And the king asked him, "Is there anyone that is still in the house of Saul, that I may show kindness to?" And Ziba said unto the king, "Jonathan has a son, who is lame on his feet."
David ended up reaching out to Jonathan's son.
David said unto him, "Fear not, for I will show you kindness for Jonathan and your father's sake, and I will restore you the lands of Saul of your grandfather, and you shall eat with me at my table."
Jonathan's son became lame due to an accident that happened when his nanny was trying to take him to safety. She accidentally fell on him, which caused his legs to become, or his feet to become lame.
But because he was an offspring of Jonathan, David's best friend, he allowed his son to sit with him at the table. Emunahlapaz, and his name is actually, he has a very long name, so if you guys are hearing this and you know the proper way to say his name, please let me know.
So David lays eyes on Bathsheba, and I guess he took time away from war for a while, and as they say, idle hands it can be the devil's workshop.
One evening he rose from his bed and walked to the roof of his place, and he saw a beautiful woman and sent to ask who she was. He was told, "She is Bathsheba, the daughter of Elam,
and the wife of Uriah, which happened to be one of David's most loyal and strongest soldiers." So lust took over David, and he ended up bringing Bathsheba to his palace and laying with her, and she became pregnant. Now, the person that Bathsheba was married to was a fine warrior. He was always there for his men. He devised a plan to have Uriah come home and lay with her so that he would think that the baby was his. But when Uriah arrived, he was just a man of good character. And he said, "I cannot in good conscience lay with my wives knowing that my men are fighting on the field. It just would not be fair." So he actually slept outside of David's palace. So David's fear led to the death of Uriah, as he had Uriah be put on the front lines in the heat of battles, and he was killed.
When Bathsheba learned that Uriah was dead, she wept for him. But when the days of mourning were past, David sent and fetched her to his house, and she became his wife, and bore him a son. The thing that David had done displeased the Lord, and the Lord sent Nathan to David. David judges himself. Nathan came and said to him, "There were 2 men in one city, one rich and the other poor. The rich man had many flocks and herds, but the poor man had nothing except one little ewe lamb, which he had brought and reared, so that it grew up with him and his children. It ate from his hand and drank from his cup, and he carried it in his arms, and it was like a daughter to him. And a traveler came to the rich man and asked for a meal. His host spared his own flocks and herds, but he took the poor man's lamb, killed it, cooked it for the wayfarer." When David heard this, he was very angry, and he said to Nathan, "As the Lord lives, the man that has done this, he must surely die, and he must refund the value of the lamb 4 times over, because he did this thing and had no pity." And then Nathan said to David, "You are that man." The Lord God of Israel has given you so much. Why have you disregarded the commandment of the Lord and done this evil in his sight? You killed Uriah the Hittite with the sword of the children of Ammon, and took his wife to be your wife.
Now, personally, I felt that Uriah, being the man that he was, would have ended up dying in battle anyway because he was so passionate about serving his country. So now David's punishment for what he had done was to be the loss of his child with Bathsheba. David's son passed away. David mourned the death of his child and went on to repent. Afterwards, Bathsheba and David had another son called Solomon, who would go on to be the wealthiest and the most wisest king to have ever lived.
Now we're going to get into David's son. His name was Absalom. And here's where the problem even deepens for David's family, which is in 2 Samuel 14, 15, and 18. In all of Israel, there was no handsomer man than David's son, Absalom. And also, he was known as David's favorite. From the soles of his foot to the crown of his head, there was no blemish in him. He cut his hair every year when it became too heavy for his head, and his hair weighed 200 shekels on the king's scales. And King David loved Absalom very dearly. Sometimes parents do put their kids on a pedestal as if they were God, and that can lead into very dangerous territory. I do believe that when you do things like that, it messes also with the kid's mind, thinking that they're inferior. The parent would love them more than God. There becomes a problem with humility, I think, when a parent favors any one child or any child more than life itself or God.
Now, another strain on David's life may have been his wives, as he had 8 wives and 18 children. And so within the splendid family, there was a problem that broke out, and it had to do with one of David's sons actually catching feelings for one of his step siblings. Her name was Tamar, and she was Absalom's sister. So one of David's sons had fallen deeply in love with her, and him and another sibling came up with a plan so that this son could actually lay with her. And he pretended like he was sick, and she went to help him, or I guess make bread for him. And while she was trying to do so, he attacked her. Word got back from Absalom, and he was furious. And maybe looking into this more, you can find out maybe how David was feeling about this, or if he found out about it. But Absalom took matters into his own hands and ended up killing Amnon and everyone that was around him at a banquet, which can be found in 2 Samuel 13:20. So after taking matters into his own hands, I think Absalom felt some kind of way that he was supposed to be in charge of things and that David wasn't doing what he needed to do as a father figure in their home. And with that, Absalom went on to try to take over David's throne in such a way that David actually had to leave his own palace and take his family because Absalom was coming from him, and definitely he wanted to end Solomon's life, his baby brother's life, as he feared that David would pass the throne on to Solomon. So at this point, the pressure is on David to stop Absalom. And even though David did not want to kill his son, there was simply nothing else to do at this point. Which leads us into the death of Absalom.
Absalom met the servants of David. He was riding a horse, and the horse went under a great oak, and Absalom's head was caught up in the thick boughs of the oak, so that it dangled between heaven and earth. And his horse galloped away, and beneath him a man saw him there and told Joab, saying, I have seen Absalom hanging in an oak. Joab said, since you saw him, why did you not strike him to the ground? I would have given you 10 shekels of silver. The man said, not for 1,000 shekels of silver would I raise my hands against the king's son. For I heard the kings telling you and Abishai and the Hittite not to touch the young man. It would have been as much as my life was worth, for nothing can be hidden from the king, and yourself, you would be blamed for me. I cannot tarry thus with you, said the Joab. He took 3 darts in the hand and thrust them into the heart of Absalom, who was still alive, hanging from the oak, and 10 of Joab's young men surrounded Absalom and stabbed him to death.
And now we go into the death of David.
So 2 Samuel 23 to 1 Kings 2 is the death of David. Now the King David was old and stricken in years, and they wrapped him in clothes. But he lost his strength daily. The end of his life drew near, and he knew that he must die. He sent for his son Solomon and charged him, saying, I go of the way of the earth, therefore you must be strong and show yourself to be a man. Keep the commandments of the Lord your God and walk in his ways. Obey his statutes and abide by his word, as it is written in the law of Moses. Then the Lord will fulfill his promise he made to me, saying, if thy children take heed to their way to walk before me in truth with all their heart and all their soul, there shall always be a male children for the throne of Israel. You know what I have endured. Be wise, therefore, in all that you do. And in this last words to the people, David spoke the qualities of the kingship. In these words, the God of Israel spoke to me, saying, and he said that he that ruleth over men must be just, ruling in the fear of God, and shall be as the light of morning, when the sun rises as a morning, with the clouds as a tender grass, spurring out the earth in a clear sunshine after rain. So David slept with his fathers and was buried in the city of David. After reigning over Israel for 40 years, 7 years in Hebron and 33 years in Jerusalem, and Solomon sat on the throne of David, his father, and ruled over the kingdom.